Hey, it's Chris, Liege Games. So, I've played it. It's launching on crowdfunding. It is Millennium War. Let's talk what you need to know about it, what my thoughts are on it, pros, cons, a little bit of everything in between, so that you can kind of have more information going into this from someone who's played it hands-on. So, let's do this. Okay, now if you're not familiar with what Millennium War is, if you're just tuning in and you're like, hey, Liege just launched another video, I just need to check out what it is and what he's saying, well, let me tell you a little bit. It is essentially like a 1 to 4 player game that is taking a MOBA-esque theme of Godzook's number of heroes, something like 35 heroes of 7 different elements and tiers, essentially, and using them to combine a team of 4 to either go head-to-head, 4-on-4, or to take a team of 4 and go head-to-head versus a boss. So it has a cooperative as well as a competitive mode. And so depending on what you're looking for, it potentially has both of those. Now, again, it is a very different take on that because on the MOBA-esque side of things, if you're familiar with that, the competitive mode has 3 different win objectives that you can do. You can either eliminate all of the enemy's heroes, you can knock down all of their ancient power structures, or you can knock out 6, 1 for each of the 6 different elements that there are of level 2 beasts or creatures, and be the first one to do that. Whereas the cooperative mode, you are fighting a boss, and you have to beat the boss. Last one standing wins, but unlike the competitive mode, where you die and you're pretty much out, although you can be resurrected occasionally, depending on the powers and depending on the people you choose. The cooperative mode, you have a certain number of lives. Essentially, if you get knocked out, you have 3 extra lives per team. No matter which hero gets knocked out, they're all, a shared pool. And you can pull from that pool to get resurrected right back to where you were. And the boss, at least the demo boss that we have, has 2 levels. A sort of beginning level, and then once you beat that health die of him, he gets upgraded, he turns into Super Saiyan Rage mode, and then he, becomes that much harder, and you have to do that much more to him to be able to beat him. And so he is moving around the map a la sort of the KDM-esque feel, and those are the 2 main modes. Now, you can play it solo. I mean, you definitely can. There's not too much information in that you can't do it. You could easily take all 4 heroes and, do it in that sense. It's just how you want to do it as well. So, that being said, let's break down a little bit of the gameplay, a little bit more detailed. Let me tell you about it. Let me show you some pictures. And let me tell you my full thoughts, pros, cons, and like I said, everything else in between. So, let's talk Millennium War. Let's do this. So, Millennium War. Let's talk about it. Let's go into a little bit of detail. This is a very interesting concept and premise, as you may have guessed by the description of it in the first place. Sort of taking your KDM trope of going against this big bad, this AI-driven deck system, and taking your multiple combatants, multiple different abilities, different features, your supports, your tanks, your utilities, your healers, that ilk, and trying to fit that into the mold and genre of KDM, but also trying to stay true to the MOBA-esque game in the first place. This is a huge board that has everything all laid out on it. And you can even see here the slots for the characters, the slots where you're going to be putting your mana, your build, your weapon shop where you're going to be buying the cards that you get that they're drawn from, and then your equipment that you can post down here, and then the board itself is over here. I'm not laying this thing out. It's just massive. There are 4 of these, 1 in each corner, and then the central area is the map that you're playing on. So that in and of itself is great. I like the fact that you're not having to just set up everything separately. It is really a good thing. Now, the other really nice thing, I'll start with the components here. It gives you the option for miniatures or standees. And if you know anything about my channel, I like standees. And these standees are kind of cool looking. They're acrylic. And so you can kind of see a little bit here of what it actually entails. And so this is, for example, and you get one of these little bases, and these bases have magnets because they also, the very ingenious, unique thing here is these little dials and these little trackers where you can keep track of a lot of your stats. Because all you do is you do your health around the outside, and then you have these other two, the shield on the inside and the attack on the outside. So as you defeat creatures, as you gain weapons, you're just manipulating these and turning the dials and keeping track. And then there's magnets in these little holders, and so boom, clicks just like that, works. It's beautiful. You move this whole thing around, it gives it some table presence. Now it's a little bit finicky when you're trying to remember, then you have to pick it up and put it back down in the same place, but it works. It works. And I mean, there's just a plethora of these. And like I said, there's like 35 different characters here. And I will say, and this is going to be turn on or turn off depending on how you feel about this, you can see the artwork is definitely more cartoony on the standees, and it is definitely more stylistic and adult-ish on the cards themselves. And these are cards that show examples of the powers on the back that come with each of the individual like miniatures. But the abilities and the cards that you're going to be laying on the board that I had, the cards of your heroes in that sense, are going to be more akin to this. And what this is this is your main hero card. You can see the stats, including the health, the range of their attack, their speed, everything you need to know at the top, including their attack and their defense starting values. Then around the outsides, if you're looking very carefully, you can see the abilities, the mana costs that each of them have, how long those effects last, whether it's like 1 turn, 2 turns, who it's affecting, how they're going to be affecting, everything you need to know from that side of things. So they're all different and unique, and this is where the character classes come in. And again, this is relatively ingenious. I really like this feature of just, again, it's a little bit of card turning, but it's not, there's nothing on this card, so you can pick it up and turn it at any point, and you're not like losing it, or where did I have this, or what was attached to this. It's very nice from that side of things. And frankly speaking, I wish the art in the standees almost matched this, because this is beautiful, and I really like the artwork on this. It is just a fantastic to look at card from that side of things. And the classes themselves, I mean, they seem relatively unique. There are definitely unique powers and unique things between all of the different characters. This is where it starts to get very interesting, though. Is this game, like I mentioned, is very, very, very ambitious. And so one of the first cons I will actually say is I will actually put this out there that this game is actually trying to be too ambitious. It sort of is a very interesting dynamic between, especially in the competitive mode, of what it's trying to be. And let me illustrate that point. The beginning of the game is very slow startup. And, your characters, if you noticed on this guy, I mean, he's got 1 attack and 1 defense, and these monsters that you're having to fight, because you start at opposite ends of the field, essentially. These monsters that are face down, they're going to be between you and the other team, and you're going to be fighting them, and you don't know what their stats are until that you flip them over, and if your attack is higher than their defense, then you kill them, and they all have these little bonuses on them. And there's level 1 monsters and there's level 2 monsters, so you're going for the level 1 monsters, and then if you get through all the level 1 monsters, then there's the level 2 monsters, and if you get, like I said, all 6 different types of the level 2 monsters, then you win. And all of them have like this little reward at the bottom. So for this one, if you kill it, you get 3 extra mana cards. If you kill this one, you get 3 extra attack. So, I mean, then they start stacking, and the enemies automatically attack you back, so it's an automatic counterattack. And so, I mean, that's nice. It's simple. It's straightforward. Again, the art is great on these. There's no issue there. But it's such a slow burn at the beginning that it sort of creates this imbalance potentially when we got to playing further. And it led to this very interesting dynamic. And this is also not one of those games where, and this is, again, I'll say this as a pro and a con, as this portion of the subset of the other part I'm talking about, that when you're choosing these characters, this is not a game where you are just willy-nilly choosing 4 characters. You're not. Because otherwise you end up what I had in my first game of 1 chaos, slow-moving Fire Lord, and 3 support characters, one of which is a utility that sort of knocks down defenses and disables people, 1 that heals, and 1 that sort of is another utility character and can't really attack much either. And so my team from the very get-go was not balanced, and that therein leads me to my next subset issue, my next con, if you will, is, like I said, in the wider scope of things, I think it's trying to do too much. You have these 7 different classes, and I will say they are distinct and unique, but they also just don't feel like I don't want to say that they're not fleshed out, because they are fleshed out. I think there is uniqueness in each of these. But in terms of the abilities, the ability to get what you want, the ability to mitigate what you need, there really isn't much, because you're just drawing a certain number of cards from this combined pool deck, and you're just drawing them off the top. And depending on how many people you're playing with or what mode you're playing with, you're drawing anywhere from 3 to 5. And you're just drawing them. So you might, depending on how good the shuffle is, you might get a combination of mana cards. You may get, a weapon or two, or you may get even a spell. Because they're also, in terms of order of, quantity, that's the order. And you may just not get what you need on your turn. You may get something completely superfluous that doesn't allow you to buy any weapons, that isn't going to allow you to use some of your abilities, and it's going to make some of these turns rather lackluster. And that's a potential downside. And that's why I say the slow buildup is just not there. Now, some of these weapons are great. Some of them are game changers. Some of them are significant. Wow, this is really cool. This is really an overpowered, in a fun way, sort of game and weapon and situation. And there is definitely an element of take that versus creatures. Now, I will say, though, the other issue I ran into in the trying to do too much is that if you wanted to turtle in this game, you kind of could for a while. We kind of found ourselves doing that. If you don't want to go head to head and risk exposure against some of these other opponents with abilities that may or may not be being fully utilized, you can sort of tank the creatures on your side, they tank the creatures on their side, and when you run out, they replace, and you can rinse and repeat. And like you saw with some of these monsters, they just increase your stats. So all of a sudden, you get 2 weapons and you knock out 2 or 3 monsters with the same guy. You can be talking someone is all of a sudden sitting at 14 or 15 attack, 4 to 6 defense, where the starting creatures or starting guys are significantly lower. Like all those level 1 creatures, their attacks and defenses range from like 0 to 4. So they're not going to pose a threat whatsoever. Even the level 2s are going to barely pose a threat at that point, because their stats max out at sort of 6 or 7. And if you get that guy across the board quickly, you can easily 1 or 2 shot some of their heroes, because some of these life points on some of the utility guys are 6 or 8. And if my attack's 15 a couple turns in, it's a big gap there. Now, again, that's going to the strategic, but also if your card draw is just not that good, and you pull a couple of those monsters where, the stats aren't in your favor, you're kind of SOL, because it also doesn't go as quickly. If there was one thing, if this game was, Epic the card game, right, where wham, bam, everything's overpowered, everything's going to kill things fast, and you know what, if you get a bad draw and it goes and you just get knocked out, it's a quick game, it's a reset, it's back to the table, choose your team again, and rinse and repeat, and you can play it again and no issue, and the time isn't too much. But it's just not that quick also, and that's why I say it's sort of this straddling the fence in between. The other thing I'll say is, like I mentioned, the powers are cool, but the use of them, at least in the rule book that I got and the definitions that I got, it leaves a lot to be desired in terms of just sheer explanation. It struck me as if this is one that I felt like could have used a lot more outside influence and outside reading and, evaluation. The stuff that is in the rulebook is good, but there is a lot of stuff that there's just gaps about. Okay, what about in this situation? What happens here? What happens here? And, the Dice Tower, Stella, and that channel did a very good how to play, but it still left some of those issues out for us when we were trying to play in the first place. And again, I think I'm not saying that as like make it or break it stuff, but just showing the potential of the game. And this is how we felt. This is how, we felt as a group playing it was, wow, we can really see the framework of a game that could be really exciting here, because these powers are cool. And once you play it 2 or 3 times, the utilization of these powers in the right way can really start to mitigate some of it. But also, like I just mentioned, some of that can't be mitigated, and it makes it more difficult to handle. And going back to the rulebook for a second, again, let me be clear. It's not a bad rulebook. It's just, it needs someone's perspective, and I don't know how much of this has been done, and I think I have an older copy of the rulebook, so, some of the things that aren't clear were cleared up by Stella's video, I'll say. but it just needs the outside influence of someone who is not within the inner circle of the test groups to sit down and say, okay, I'm starting this from scratch. Here is the rule book. Here is how I'm playing. I'm trying to set this up. What do I do here? Okay, I can't figure this out. What do I do here? And either then have them point it out if they're missing it, or, hey, we're not explaining this clearly enough if a person off the street can't get it. And it's just that finesse that is lacking. Also, I will say in the finesse in terms of the classes, I mean, it felt, again, a little bit too spread out. Now, I was worried because there were so many classes. There are 7 classes. And again, I think in terms of this deck, I mean, this card deck is literally like this long, this thick. And with so many in there, there's just a chance that you just don't see a type of mana that you need for a certain character for a long time. Now, there are plenty of this master mana that you can use that is essentially a wild, but at the same time, I don't want to be having to use that all the time because, again, there's only so much of that to go around between my 4, team members. And so someone is inevitably kind of getting the shaft. It felt like, not hugely, but just we noticed it. Okay, well, I'm having to prioritize this guy, and these 2 guys are sort of secondary, and I'm just not able to use their capabilities nearly as much. The master class, which can use all of the mana, is, you can only have 1 of them on your team, but they're significantly overpowered in a good way. But it sort of highlights how difficult it is when they're getting more, how potentially, less the others are getting in the same way. I heard someone say this on social media, board game social media, a couple months ago, and I think this definitely applies to it too, is if the strategy of the first couple turns in a game is to build up stuff and is, the same-ish every single time, like we found ourselves doing here with, like, fighting the creatures, getting the stat boosts, getting a little bit of mana, getting a little bit of weaponry, why not just jump to that right away? Why not just skip part of that and have them start off with that from the first standpoint? And skip some of that, and so that it's just head-to-head smash right away in this game. I think that is what I would love to see. Bump up some of these stats, make the mana a little bit easier to get, mitigate some of the deck in terms of, what you're getting from where and how you're getting it. Smash, bang, boom, incentivize, go across, have some sort of timer, have some sort of terrain effect that affects you if you're not, getting out of certain areas quickly enough in turtling, and just go. Like, then this game would be smashing. It would be great. Because let me be very clear, as much as I've put all these cons out there, the framework for a very good game is definitely here. And again, it's just the minor things, like the clarifications. If it says within a certain area, 7x7 grid. Now, granted, the grid itself on the whole board is only like 9x9 or 10x10. So when it says a 7x7 area, you're talking about massive areas of grid. But with some of these definitions, it doesn't say, okay, well, is it centered on this guy? Is it an area of my choosing within range? Is it anywhere on the map? Just minor things like that, for example, just need some clarity that can clean up a lot of this and make this, an okay to a good to a great sort of scenario. Just some little specifics across the board. So, we haven't even talked about the other half of this game, essentially, and that is the boss battler, like the co-op version. And I think this sort of reminds me very much in the way of Bloodstone, when it was run by Druid City Games earlier this year, because this is just massive, massive overhead. Now, I know that with the components, I've got the thing sitting next to me, so I'm looking and pointing at it over there. Anyway, the components are going to have a significant overlap. And so, yeah, it'd be nice if you could say, okay, I'm going to consolidate all the components, and we can, sort of Venn diagram it in terms of cooperative, competitive, and Venn diagram in the middle has all the components that are going to be shared by both sides. But I think especially from the price side of things, that's going to worry people, especially when you have the miniatures, the standees, and these, let me be clear, even as a prototype, these are like really good quality. Again, like these are really good quality. I would be very happy just with these standees, in case that wasn't also very clear. I wish the artwork matched, between the cards and the standees, like I mentioned earlier. But again, minor trivial things. Because I would be happy one way or the other. Like if they were both super serious or they were both super cartoony, again, I have no problem with that. But I look at this and I go, okay, this just, again, there's a lot of great stuff here. And especially with the book that they've got mapping out all of these various bosses and things like that. If you went just heavy on that side, the whole just KDM-esque thing with your MOBA, one-offs, two-offs, you could make a small campaign out of it. Have some linking scenarios, have some bonuses if you win here, negatives if you win here, diverging in terms of what bosses you're fighting if you win or lose. That would be, again, really, really cool. And if you just went full MOBA, like Guards of Atlantis, and you just said total asymmetry with these characters, again, there's a lot of cool stuff, concepts, characters in here. If you sat down and said you really want to make your team, I mean, that is the core of the competitive side of things. Like sitting down saying, okay, this and this and this, and maybe that does require just taking it back just a step, balancing out, you know, again, maybe eliminating even some of the creatures, or maybe just have the creatures be more interactive on the competitive side of things. Because if your defense is high, there's no penalty essentially sometimes on these level 1 creatures to going up to them, attacking them, getting them flipped over to see what they do and what their stats are and seeing what you have to do, because you can then just sit next to them and camp next to them without penalty. Now obviously the team on the other side, you have to worry about that, but at the same time, if you're on your side and they're on their side, because it's kind of, you know, 2 on one side, 2 on the other, and 1 on each end, you can kind of pick and choose a little bit and stay away from the other team if you're not being super aggressive, and then just, you know, like I mentioned. So it's just missing something from that aspect, again, to make it just great. And if you even split this out into competitive, cooperative, both pledges, again, I don't know how that would affect logistics, but I think you'd get a lot more from that side of things. Or maybe we'll use this comparison to Bloodstone because I think it's the perfect comparison to something that we saw that funded that people were still worried about. And I mean, my own criticisms of Bloodstone notwithstanding, that I really wanted the PvE and the PvP was less important. And in this game, I think the PvP is the standout. But it just feels like there's too much going on at the same time. And if you could separate, you know, make the first campaign all PvP. Make the second campaign, hey guys, we have these extra bosses that we spent a bunch of time balancing on, moving around, doing that side of things. And then, hey, this stuff that you've already got, we're just going to give you the bosses now on top of that, and the boss map, and a little bit of tweaks in how the rules are. Or vice versa. Going back to the draw system here for a second. And they said that they tried separating this out. And so I give them a lot of kudos for trying it out. But I mean, this is literally the stack right here, right? That's how big this stack of cards are. So what happens sometimes is you just don't get the gems you want. You don't get the mana you necessarily need as much of. And you can just get weapons that aren't as attuned to what you want. And this is a big stack. Now you're drawing from both ends potentially. So you have a little bit of that. You can see the top cards, so you can do that. But again, you know, focus. I mean, this is great. This is great stuff. But there's, like I said, almost too much of a good thing. And how do you pare that down? Now, I don't know. But I'd be interested regardless. Because, I mean, the one thing we said, regardless of this, when we were playing head-to-head, I mean, it's fun. It's fun. The powers are fun. Some of these abilities on these weapons are fun. It was just the build-up, the asymmetry, the having to be very careful in your choosing. It's a little bit too long for what it is right now on the PvP side of things. So it puts it in sort of an interesting position. And the question you find yourself looking at right now is going, okay, in this current iteration, and let me be very clear, I'm not even sure I have the most recent iteration, so some of this may be addressed on the campaign page already, or during the campaign, or potentially post-campaign. Would I want this in its current iteration? And the problem is, I'd say right now, I don't want to play this over other things with this current iteration. Now, some of those changes that are made, some of those issues that are sort of steamrolled out, divisions being, looked at, reminds me very much of the other game from 2020, Sheol. Sheol, that one, where it looked super good in concept. It had a lot of trouble funding. It ended up funding at the end, just barely over, because they also took a lot of suggestions. They changed the structure of things. They changed how they were doing things. And there's also been a lot of change post-campaign in addition. But that's the question. And this is also just my opinion, because I know they've also been working on this game for years. So this is not just something that they threw together in the last year or so. I mean, there's way too much work that's been, evident. And so I also don't know how some of that is flexible or not to be changed in the first place. But depending on what happens with it, is it worth a look? Absolutely. I mean, there aren't many games that do boss battling like this, with the asymmetric heroes that you're picking and choosing and being able to take into a scenario like this and just go. That's very cool. That's very unique. Also, I mean, like I said, there's not many games that are trying to accomplish this MOBA-esque, asymmetric, multi-class side of things either. And that's also something that is heavily worth looking at, because I know that there's a lot of video game people looking or in the tabletop scene as well. And if you can do this well, I mean, it's there. So there you go. Those are my thoughts. That's my experience with it. Obviously, purely my opinion, all subject to change, but giving them a big shout out for even willing to be sending me the game in the first place. And hopefully this was helpful for you. Check out the campaign page. I will put it in the comment section, the description below. As always, thanks for watching. Thanks for putting up with me. And thanks. Stay classy. I'll see you around.